Hello and welcome to Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world. I'm Layo Olarinde. On the program this week, Pakistan continues to suffer the devastating effects of the monsoon season, with the government appealing for international aid and funding. Also, despite the war in Ukraine, citizens in the country are finding ways to make life easier and better for themselves. One-third of Pakistan has been completely submerged by historic flooding as devastating flash floods have washed away roads, homes and crops, leaving a trail of deadly havoc across the country. The nation is going through its monsoon season, a season which the UN chief describes as a monsoon on steroids.
Drone footage shows the extent of destruction in Pakistan's Rojan city caused by recent floods, as the country's leaders appeal to the international community for financial help to cope with the devastation. Videos show a 360-degree view of Rojan, a city in Punjab, with large swathes of land inundated by floodwater. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, a boy stranded in the middle of a heavily flooded stream was rescued by a helicopter during a mission operated by the army. Footage shows how the pilot lowered the helicopter and the crew lifted the boy into the aircraft.
I am flushing out water to retrieve any bedding or anything that is left intact. As you can see, nothing could be saved. I am flushing out water to salvage anything dry and safe there.
The country's climate change minister calls the situation a climate-induced humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. As the United Nations appeals for $160 million to help Pakistan, the foreign minister Bilwala Bhutto Zardari says help is needed, hoping that financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund will take the economic fallout into account.
The Pakistani people are facing a monsoon on steroids, the relentless impact of epochal levels of rain and flooding. The climate catastrophe has killed more than 1,000 people, with many more injured. Millions are homeless, schools and health facilities have been destroyed, livelihoods are shattered, critical infrastructure wiped out, and people's hopes and dreams have washed away. Every province of the country has been affected. In my prior position as High Commissioner for Refugees, I witnessed the enormous giving spirit of the Pakistani people, welcoming and protecting millions of Afghan refugees, and in many cases, sharing their limited resources. It breaks my heart to see these generous people suffering so much. In response to the devastation, the government of Pakistan has released funds, including immediate cash relief, but the scale of needs is rising like the floodwaters, and it requires the world's collective and prioritized attention. The United Nations is issuing a flash appeal for $160 million to support the response led by the government of Pakistan. These funds will provide 5.2 million people with food, water, sanitation, emergency education, protection, and health support.
I haven't seen any destruction or devastation of this scale. I find it very difficult to put into words the phraseologies that we're used to, whether it's monsoon rains or flooding, doesn't quite seem to encapsulate the ongoing devastation and disaster that we're still witnessing. The fact that Pakistan contributes negligible amounts to the overall carbon footprint, but we are devastated by climate disasters such as these time and time again, and we have to adapt within our limited resources in whatever way we can to live in this new environment. Going forward, I would expect not only the IMF, but the international community and international agencies to truly grasp the level of devastation.
For the economy, the initial economic losses from floods could reach at least $10 billion, and that's according to the planning minister, Alsan Iqbal.
I think it's going to be huge. So far, a very early preliminary estimate is that it is big. It is higher than $10 billion to, very early estimate, very rough estimate. But our joint survey teams comprising of NDMA, PDMA and Army are now out in the field. But many areas are still not accessible because of the water. Until water completely recedes, they will not be able to go and physically do the survey. But my hunch is that this is going to be 2 to 3 times higher than what we are estimating.
In the meantime, some flood-hit Pakistanis have been receiving aid. Volunteers distributed aid to Pakistanis displaced by rain-triggered floods, while others claim to have received no help for days. In Rajanpur, one of the worst affected regions in Punjab province, people lined up to get food and water from aid workers. And an aid worker said they were providing 3 meals a day. Over the weekend, Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif lamented the extreme devastation caused by flooding in the southern province of Sindh. In his first official tour of the flood-devastated province, Sharif took an aerial view of the worst affected areas, including Sukor, Rohi, Karpur, Faizganj, Katdiji, and Tari Mirwa. Historic monsoon rains and flooding in Pakistan have affected more than 30 million people, killing more than 1,000 over the last few weeks.
As the war in Ukraine continues, there have been some welcome developments in the week. The first shipment of grain from Ukraine to East Africa since the war began docked at the Red Sea port in Djibouti on Tuesday.
A ship carrying wheat from Ukraine to the drought-stricken Horn of Africa docked on Tuesday, August the 30th. The Brave Commander is the first vessel to make the journey since Russia's invasion 6 months ago, which Moscow calls a special military operation. The bulk carrier transported more than 20,000 tons of grain loaded in Djibouti and transported to Ethiopia. According to the World Food Programme, that and another shipment following close behind is enough to feed 1.5 million people for a month. The WFP says extreme weather, surging food prices and conflict mean 82 million people in East Africa need food aid across 9 countries. Officials hope the Brave Commander's successful voyage will inspire private companies to begin shipping grain from Ukraine to Eastern Africa. Rising global food prices and difficulties in raising donor funding have forced the UN to cut rations for refugees and displaced people in the region. The Brave Commander was loaded earlier this month after the UN and Turkey brokered a deal between Kiev and Moscow to unblock 3 Black Sea ports. Russia and Ukraine usually supply 90% of East Africa's wheat imports.
With Russia's invasion of Ukraine in its 6th month, well, some fear the long-term result will be an environmental disaster that could last for years. Ukrainian authorities continue to carry out controlled explosions to clear landmines in the area where remnants of the Russian occupiers are still scattered. These divers are demining experts searching a river in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces took back the Sumy region from Russian forces in April, but 4 months on, cannon shells are still being fished out in its waters. Ukraine's Environment Ministry estimates it will take at least a decade to clear all the mines and explosives from the country, and their fears long-term war could mean an environmental disaster, leaving Ukraine's waters contaminated for years to come.
It is known that water demining will go on for years. It is the area where we have a lot of work to do. We estimate the work that has to be done to demine Ukraine's waters will take at least 5 to 7 years. Why? Because it is the most difficult type of demining.
Ukraine's emergency service in June said more than 239 square miles of land littered with thousands of explosives had been cleared, but nearly 160,000 square miles are still seen as contaminated. Sofia Sadogurska at the Center for Environmental Initiatives also agrees that the consequences of the pollution could last for decades.
The consequences of such pollutions, we can say, for example, from experience from previous wars, could last for decades, and it means that these territories are heavily polluted, for example, with heavy metals, with other chemicals. It means that these areas will be impossible to live, for example, because there will be no fresh water, there will be always danger of poison, there will be very difficult to maintain, for example, agriculture.
She also warns that the efforts to remove the unexploded devices may not be enough to protect the ecosystem and human health.
These territories are affected not just by mining itself, but also by heavy pollution from explosions and from rockets and from the moving of the, for example, military troops. So to just remove mines on these territories will not be enough to restore all this unique ecosystem.
An estimated 27% of Ukraine's land needs demining. As part of efforts to help, the U.S. government approved $89 million in funding to help Ukraine equip and train 100 teams to clear landmines and unexploded ordnance for a year. The funding is the largest U.S. demining program yet in Ukraine. As summer is coming to an end in the war-torn country of Ukraine, clubbing and dancing is offering a rare chance to Ukraine's youth who are trying to avoid the horrors that they have lived through, even if it's just for one afternoon.
Parties rarely end with a DJ destroying a barrel painted in the colors of a neighboring country. But this is the reality for Ukraine's electronic music scene as it tries to keep the beat going through the war. Before the Russian invasion began on February the 24th, Ukraine's capital Kiev was fast becoming a top European nightlife destination. Now, its young creatives are beginning to rebuild a cultural fabric devastated by the conflict and gathering donations for the armed forces on the front lines. Partygoer Anastasia Lukoshina, a 21-year-old student with a side hustle in copywriting, says that her entrance fee could help her peers who are at the front line. Although there is debate in Ukraine about how people far away from artillery shelling should behave in their free time, Anastasia said she was convinced that she's dancing for Ukraine's victory.
Many people from my university are currently on the front line or serving in the territorial defense units. However, it doesn't change how I feel when I'm here, because I understand that such events support those people. Part of the profits received from this event will go to the front line, and this means that people I know from the university might receive help as well.
The DJ at the event, 34-year-old fixture of Kiev nightlife, label owner Garrik Pledov, says his events are attended by military personnel and that his lineups include former DJs now defending Ukraine in the country's south and east. People who serve in the Ukrainian armed forces are in our lineups and attend our parties. They come up to us to thank us for maintaining this peaceful vibe in the cities. They say that whenever they get the chance to return from the front line, they can at least for a few days party and really feel it. In these moments, they understand what they are fighting for. The event entertained an upbeat crowd in the sunny courtyard of a disused factory, one of many vast, dilapidated Soviet-era industrial spaces repurposed by artists and musicians in Kiev's Podil district. However, the war is never far away, with ravers forced to head to the nearest shelter when sirens sound. Pledov held his first event, an art exhibition, in May, but held off from hosting what he called proper parties until mid-June.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we head over to Lancashire, England, to join one of the world's craziest culinary competitions. We'll give you more details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. A ship of books that sails from one country to another, called Logos Hope, docks in Benghazi. For book lovers, thousands have been attracted to the floating library docks in Libya.
Logos Hope, a floating international library, has docked at Benghazi port, attracting around 20,000 visitors, according to its supervisors. The floating book fair presented for nearly a week a large collection of books, including more than 5,000 titles.
Over 20,000 visitors already here in Benghazi, and we can see that the people of Benghazi are very, very happy to visit our ship, and our crew from 58 nations are also very happy to meet the Libyan people here in Benghazi on board the ship. They're coming to buy the books on board, many books, from books for small children right up to medical books, engineering books, computing books, accounting books, many different types.
Book topics range from science, sports, gastronomy, arts, medicine, to dictionaries and languages in both Arabic and English.
The arrival of the ship or the floating library to the city of Benghazi is, of course, a big event, bringing about great attention and a very large number of citizens. I see this from two sides. Of course, I attended the opening and browsed the books, of course. Most of the books were in English because it's the language of science and is universally spoken. There are also many Arabic books. I bought 3 Arabic books on the first day, including Cultural Criticism and Realistic Vision in the Story of the Palestinians, and a third book related to sociology.
Volunteers from 58 different nationalities work on board the ship since 2009. It's been cruising to most international ports, loaded with tens of thousands of books to sell, and is classified as the largest mobile library in the world.
Let's head over to Bogota, Colombia now, where almost 16,000 musicians and singers are breaking the record for the world's biggest concert. The performance was to celebrate the country's armed conflict truce.
Around 16,000 musicians, singers and children's choirs, grouped together by the Bogota Philharmonic Orchestra, performed among others Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Latino America, originally from the Puerto Rican group Cali 13, famous throughout Latin America for its lyrics criticizing social and political issues.
It is an unbelievable experience, and it makes you feel nervous because you see incredible musicians. But it's wonderful to be here and a unique experience to feel music with so many musicians.
Bogota broke a world record for the biggest concert ever performed to celebrate the country's armed conflict truce.
Recently, the Truth Commission, as a result of the peace agreement, delivered a very painful final report. It speaks of many deaths, thousands and thousands have disappeared, and we wanted to pay tribute to all the victims of Colombia.
The event to break the record of the world's biggest concert in Bogota's Simon Bolivar Metropolitan Park was set to honor Colombia's Truth Commission's final report, which was released in June.
I am very delighted because I could see how Bogota's Philharmonic Orchestra grew. The parents of these children really believe in the progress that can be made through an orchestra, like how we can build a society from now on, and how many children can improve their behaviors and their manners to interact with others.
established as part of a 2016 peace deal between the government and the now demobilized Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC rebels. The Truth Commission was set to expose the truth behind human rights abuses committed during Colombia's almost 60-year internal conflict.
And finally, on the program, we move to Lancashire, England, to join one of the world's craziest culinary competitions that has returned after a 2-year COVID-induced hiatus. We're talking about the 12th annual World Gravy Wrestling Championships at the Rosenball pub in Rosendale. A host of wrestlers took part in the event that sees competitors grapple in a pool of gravy for 2 minutes. Take a look.
Typical stone cold fashion, cracking a beer early. Oh, but not just cracking a beer early, starting the fight early. I've now got the stopwatch so there's no confusion. I'm going to start the fight in 3, 2, 1, fight!
Rather than eating gravy with their roast dinners, men and women at a pub in England wrestled in the sauce over the bank holiday weekend. Fancy dress, wrestling, and lashings of gravy were the order of the day at the competition. Now in its 12th year, dozens of contestants take part in the World Gravy Wrestling Championships at the Rose and Bowl pub in Lancashire on Monday. Speaking ahead of the messy event in which participants throw each other around for 2 minutes at a time, previous winner Joel Hicks speaks on what it takes to be a champion.
When wrestling in gravy, what it takes to be champion is an ability not to worry about what you actually look like when you're doing it. You just got to get in there, you get messy, you get covered in it, it stinks, it gets in your eyes, you just grab onto your opponent and just hope for the best.
Rolling the final big move of the fight. 3, 2, 1!
As well as wrestling ability, the judges award points for fancy dress, comedy effects, and entertainment.
Well, you've got to be, number 1, entertaining. Number 2, you've got to come with the right spirit. Number 3, you've got to be prepared to be thrown around in that.
Rolling the final big move of the fight. 3, 2, 1!
Ahead of winning the women's title, Imogen Young said the most important attribute needed to win is confidence.
Confidence. That's what it takes. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how little. You know, I'm 5 foot compared to this guy over here. It's purely confidence.
Hundreds of spectators gathered to watch the wrestlers going for it in a pool of cold vegan gravy. The silly event, which started in a pub car park, was originally a one-off to raise awareness of a food festival that was taking place locally. Over a decade later, the championships has its own entry in the Guinness Book of Records. Lloyd Clarkson, who dressed as fictional character Ali G for the event, won the men's title.
Ali G, ladies and gents, your male World Gravy Wrestling Champion for 2022.
It feels awesome. Feels absolutely awesome. Yeah, top of the world. I mean, I stink of a roast dinner. Absolutely stink of it, which is making me hungry. So, to be honest, I suppose the way it's making me really feel is hungry.
Superb.
Around 2,500 litres of gravy is made for the championship, which raises money for East Lancashire Hospice. Gravy is a sauce often made from the juices of meats that run naturally during cooking and often thickened with wheat flour or cornstarch for added texture.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time. But remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Layo Olarinde. Bye for now.